Hello and welcome to this first video on the AS Level Thinking Skills course. My recommendation would be that you make notes as you're watching this particular video, and you can use something like an exercise book or use a Word document. So the heading for this first particular video and the title is what is the AS Level Thinking Skills course? So we're going to go through a brief overview as to what the content for the course is, how the course operates, to understand the skills that you need to hone and will need to work on to approach this particular course, and then hopefully to begin to apply some of the skills introduced. So we're going to introduce some of the things that we're going to be looking at over the course of the next few weeks. This is a brand new course for OSH. It's not something that we've offered before, and the reason why there's been a bit of a delay in producing this particular video compared to the EBQ is that, understandably, I need to make sure that I understand the requirements of the course and what is expected of students and staff. So I've had to do a little bit of research on this particular one. Just to give you a bit of reassurance on that particular component, because you might think as a teacher that hasn't taught this particular course before, you might be a bit skeptical, but as a history and politics teacher, the skills that are appropriate for the Thinking Skills AS course, which are essentially critical thinking and problem solving, are essentially what we teach for history, particularly anyway at A level. So a lot of these skills will be transferable, and from my own expertise, I have had experience at A level delivering a number of these pieces of content. So what is the Cambridge International AS level in thinking skills? Well, you can do an AS level in thinking skills, or you can do a full A level. It is from the Cambridge International Board, which is different to OCR, but it is a recognised course. It is an internationally recognised course that is accepted by UK universities. It is not a soft option. You know, going back maybe 15 years ago, lots of students did things like general studies, and they weren't necessarily accepted by universities. Thinking skills is recognised by very reputable universities internationally, and the reasons why is this is a very difficult course. It is something which does need time, and it does need attention. So it is designed to do a number of things, this particular course. The first is that it's designed to complement your other chosen A-levels, and that's really any combination of A-levels. So whether you're studying history, politics and geography, or maths, physics and chemistry, the skills that you should be developing through this particular course should be applicable to your other chosen A-levels. The second reason why this particular course is so important is it's designed to support the skills which are assessed in competitive application tests. So some students might be looking to apply for competitive medical pathways or law pathways. They might be asked to go to interview for different universities or for higher apprenticeships. And the skills that you develop through this particular course are utilised in lots of these different competitive application tests. And finally, and this is perhaps the most important one, well, not perhaps, it is the most important one, is to ensure that you're able to critically challenge and reflect on the events of the world. So as an adult, going into the world of work, or being aware of certain issues, being able to critically challenge and reflect on the current affairs and current events. This course is for those that are wishing to learn for the skills alone. So you might be wanting to improve on the skills that Thinking Skills AS qualification brings forward, and you may not wish to gain a qualification at the end of this. You might do this purely just to improve those particular skills to complement your A-level studies. You might wish to do this to gain a qualification at the very end. For students at OSH, with all the current events as they are, you know, the primary focus is on your A-level subjects, and it might be the case that you want to learn these for the skills. But for Year 11 students, it might be that you wish to get a qualification at the very end of this particular course. And these particular sessions are designed for both groups of people. So whether you want that qualification or if you don't, it is something that hopefully you can get something from. So we're offering the AS level thinking skills course, not the full A level course. The reason for that, obviously, with the current circumstances, to offer another A level could perhaps be detrimental in terms of the amount of workload that would be expected of you. With the AS level thinking skills course, it is an externally assessed course. It is something that has no coursework components, and it involves 2 exam papers. The first exam paper is on problem solving, and it is an hour and 30 minutes. It's got 50 marks in total, and it makes up 50% of the overall course. For that examination, you are allowed to have a calculator, and the subject content is predominantly focused on organising information, processing information, analysing data, and considering wider problems. For paper 2, it is slightly longer with an hour and 45 minutes, and there are more extended questions, but it is also 50 marks, and it is worth 50% of your overall course. The subject content for critical thinking is to evaluate and use evidence appropriately, to analyse reasoning, to evaluate reasoning, and to construct reasoning. And I'll talk about those particular parts of the subject content in this particular video, because we're going to introduce paper 2 as the first topic that we're going to look at. So in terms of what you'll need, this is a remote course to begin with during the lockdown process. So I can't necessarily have the same interactions that I would particularly want, which would be in the classroom, but you do need to get organised. And what's brilliant about the Cambridge Assessment International Education Board is that they have a lot of the information available for students online. So the link that you've got here, and you can pause the YouTube video if you want and type that out and put that into any internet browser that you've got. I would recommend going on that particular page, downloading all the PDF forms and making sure that you've got them in a secure folder on your computer. The website that you've got there has information about the syllabus, it has information about the examination process, and it's something that I would suggest after you've watched this particular video that you go through in a little bit more detail. What you'll also need is you'll need access to a number of websites which the Cambridge International Board website directs you to. So for example, this particular website that's on the screen now has a number of different exercises that you can do as and when you would like. And the benefit of this particular course is you shouldn't just necessarily be waiting for the video content. You can be going away and you can be finding a variety of quality online resources at your disposal on critical thinking. So do have a look on the Cambridge website, which will direct you to websites such as this. You may wish to, and I'm not saying that you need this, but you may wish to invest in some of the approved resources by Cambridge, the Cambridge International Board. The book to the left, so Dawes, Matthews, Robertson, Thwaites, is the one that I'm using at the moment. It's one that I've read through. It's very user friendly, it's very straightforward, it's very well laid out as well. It's quite hefty in terms of the amount of pages, so it is something that is going to take a bit of time, but it might be something that you wish to work through, or it might be something that you can use as a reference point. The book to the right unfortunately isn't available at the moment on Amazon. There seems to be a supply issue with the current circumstances, so I did try and order it about a month ago, but unfortunately it's been there's no stock left. So hopefully when you're watching this there's more stock, and that might be something that you wish to invest in. What I would also suggest that you do is you get yourself organised, as I said at the very start of this video, and you have a folder that you can set up on your computer, and you can have it labelled as thinking skills. As resources come through and as you start typing your notes, it would be a good idea to keep a record so that when you're revising you've got a wealth of information that you can go to. Likewise, it might be useful as you're watching these YouTube videos to take notes at the same time, and again you can put that in your secure folder. If you prefer to work on paper, and that might be quite useful if you're watching YouTube videos, then I would suggest that you've got a pad of paper in a folder, or alternatively you've got an exercise book that you can just record and make notes in as well. So this is how we're going to structure the course. This is the advice from the board as well. We're going to break it down into 8 components. In terms of how long this will take, well, for however long we're in lockdown, I'll be releasing videos every Monday, and hopefully they're things that you can take on board and can build upon. So we're going to be looking at critical thinking first, which is for paper 2. We're then going to look at problem solving and introduce the basic components for that. We'll then look at critical reasoning, then critical thinking, problem solving, data analysis, and then reasoning with data. So we're not just going to go paper 2 solely and then paper 1. You know, lots of these particular skills that we're bringing up will be applicable in both papers, and we're going to go at the approach that the exam board have recommended. If you do get the textbook as well, it's not necessarily in the same order. The order of the textbook is slightly different, but this is the advice from the Cambridge board as to how we're going to lay this out. So we're going to start off by looking at paper 2, which is our critical thinking course. Now, you might know a little bit about you might think you know what criticism or critical thinking or critics are, and the purpose of this particular video, what's left of this particular video, is to just go through really what those particular terms mean, and just to start getting you thinking along the right sort of lines before we go into some specifics and make sure that we build up those particular skills. Now, those words of critical thinking or criticism or critic, they all originate from the classical Greek word kritikos, which means to judge. Now, if we think about our own judgments of what the word critic might mean, we usually hold it in quite a negative light. So usually we think of critics being very negative towards the subject matter in which they're critiquing, and that word criticism is usually got negative connotations that go alongside it. But we also might be aware of the work of different critics. So on the left of your screen you've got Ali Plumb, who is the Radio 1 film critic, and you'll be aware that a lot of his work is incredibly positive, and he tries to show the positives of the films that he's reviewing. Likewise, we might know films like Ratatouille, where we've got the critic on the right, and him being incredibly negative towards all the dishes apart from at the very end, bit of a spoiler there, with the Ratatouille dish. So that word critic or critical usually has negative connotations, but that isn't what critical thinking necessarily is. It's not just judging. Anyone can make a judgment and give an opinion on something. It takes no special training to do that, and it's very easy for people to go online, to offer an opinion, to offer a judgment, and to say that that's them thinking critically. Really what we need to do is we need to approach critical thinking as a discipline. So you'll notice at the top that critical thinking has a capital C and a capital T, and the reason for that is that this has to be approached as a process. So critical thinking operates by trying to train people to become critical thinkers, and that's what we're aiming towards with this particular course. So if we're a critical thinker, the first thing that we need to do is we need to direct our attention to our focus, and our focus is what we call texts. Now, in history and other disciplines, we might refer to these as sources, but texts or sources are essentially where information or where arguments or where persuasive points have been written or communicated on. So it might be the form of an online article, it might be a book, it might be a magazine entry, it might be a television program, a tweet, it can be a YouTube video, it could be this, anything whatsoever where people are communicating ideas. Now, texts are produced for a particular purpose, but we can't just see them in isolation. We've got to know a little bit about where that text has come from. So as part of this process of critical thinking, we have to consider who has made that particular text, and we call that the author. So the author can be an organisation, an institution, it can be an expert, it might be somebody just passing judgment, but we need to consider that as well. And we also need to consider the intended audience of the particular text. Now, the audience might be somebody who is being quite passive, they might be quite active, they might be a reader, a watcher, a listener. What we need to concern ourselves with is us being that critical audience. So as a critical thinker, we need to change our approach in how we try and receive that information from the text and how we approach that. So if we're approaching a text as a critical thinker and as part of that critical audience, we need to do three things, and these three things make up the assessment objectives of this particular paper. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to analyse that particular text. Now that's identifying what are the key parts to the text. You might see a lot of people highlighting as they're reading. That's something that there's no actual empirical evidence to suggest that it particularly works, highlighting, but it's a way in which people try and organise the analysis, that analysis stage of their critical thinking approach to that text. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to understand the meaning of the text, so breaking it down maybe into a more manageable bite-sized chunk and processing what it might mean. The second assessment objective is to evaluate. Now that's judging as a process, and we've talked about critiquing before as something that critics might do, but that's judging either in a positive or a negative manner how successful the text is. Now that can be in the form of how effective that particular text has been in forming an argument. It might be judging its credibility. So if I'm Ali Plumb, for example, and I was watching a film, I would be analysing it, I would be noting down what are the key parts, I would try and understand their meaning, the key themes, and then my evaluation would be judging the success of that particular film, judging the credibility of the arguments that has been formed or tried to be portrayed during that particular film, and that would make up that evaluation component. The final assessment objective is the one that we're really focused on for this thinking skills course. Not only do we want people to pass judgment, but we want people to give further arguments, and that's giving your response to the text. So some of the questions which are posed during this thinking skills course and questions that you might get in your examination, you might not know anything about before, but you'd be asked to read different pieces of text, you'd be asked to pass judgment in the form of an evaluation after analysing it, and give your opinions as well, and that can be on a range of different topics. So the skills that are trying to be introduced through this course mean that you can hopefully apply that to any kind of information that you're shown. So let's take an example for this first week. This is the first video, and what we could do is we could start off incredibly patronising, and we could go through the very minute details of what forms an argument and how we analyse and how we evaluate. But it's important that we build this up through time. And at the very start, what the AS Cambridge course suggests that you do is you jump in right at the deep end and see what your skills are like before we do any specific teaching on how we can improve them. So let's take this particular article. It's from The Guardian, and you can see the hyperlink at the top, and again you could note it down, copy it into a browser, or alternatively you can go to Google and type in "how will the world emerge from the coronavirus crisis" and put The Guardian as well. What I'd like you to do in preparation for next week is I'd like you to read this article. I have no particular comments that I'd like to say on this article at this particular stage. It's not one that has been advised by the Cambridge board, but it's obviously very relevant at the moment, and it's something that perhaps you'll be able to engage with as something that might be quite interesting. The title is about how perhaps we can't go back to normal and how coronavirus will change the world. And if you have a look at that picture, you might start to think about perhaps what the argument might be from the author of this, a gentleman called Baker. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read this particular article. It's not going to be a quick article, it's going to take maybe a bit of time. I'm not going to give you any advice about how to analyse it, how to evaluate it, how to offer your own judgment. I just want to see how you cope with this particular task to start with. And I do have some questions for you that I'd like to go through next week in next week's video. The questions are relatively short, but it's going to take you a bit of time to consider some points for this. So firstly, what is the argument put forward by Baker? If you go back to that previous picture, you might already have a bit of an idea just by looking at the picture itself, and that's really that analysis stage. What techniques has Baker used to support his argument as well? So how are they approaching this particular question, and how are they forming this judgment? Finally, are you persuaded by the argument that Baker has put forward? And if not, why not? So it's not about just being critical. It's not just saying, oh, I don't agree with things. And in this era of fake news, that's something that a lot of people will go to as their initial thought process. I don't agree with something and I've got to be skeptical about it. Critical thinkers don't do that. So my advice when you're reading this is 5 things. Firstly, be open-minded and fair. You might already have an opinion about The Guardian. Put that to a side. Secondly, try to be active and informed. If there are things that you don't understand as you're reading, it might be worth just going on Google, getting a book, having a look as to what they are. So if you don't know what the Black Death is, for example, just go on Google, find out what it is. Thirdly, be skeptical to a degree. Don't go overboard. Don't think that everything that you read is wrong, but don't necessarily believe everything that you read as well. It's treading a fine balance, and obviously we'll be going through this at a later stage as well. Be independent as well. So by independent doesn't mean that you have to just read this all by yourself. It's important to listen to others, but it might be that you want to read other information whilst you're reading that particular Guardian article. So show that independence, not just to do the bog standard thing that has been set here. And finally, and this is the advice from Cambridge, and I think it's quite pertinent as well, is to be brave about this. If you've got a judgment, if you've got an opinion about what Baker has put forward, and you might agree with it and you might want to add further points, or you might disagree with it, then put forward that particular approach. Too often at GCSE and A-level standard, students are wary of offering their opinions in case they are wrong. Now, at this particular stage, we're at the very, very embryonic process of critical thinking. So we're not going to get it right. And as a consequence, try and be brave. Have conversations with your family members about what you're reading. Pass on what you're saying. Ask for their opinions. Challenge them. Put forward what you think as well. So I'll be posting these videos every single Monday. Thank you very much if you've listened all the way to the end. And have a go at that prep work ready for next week.